Hello, hello. It is another show all about the authors' ups and downs and the lessons they've learned. So without any further ado, please welcome Vanessa May, who's going to tell us all about her journey to become a published author. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks, Sheryl. It's lovely to be here.
I do get very excited about doing these interviews. I'll just saying to you off air, because there's always, as an author myself, and I was just saying to you, I thought the second one would be easier than the first. And actually, obviously, there's a lot of familiarity, but it didn't. I thought it'd be quicker. I think that's what I thought. So it's all lovely to listen to you, you successful published authors, that I can actually take even more tidbits down to even help me on my journey the second time round. So without any further ado, tell us a little bit about you and who you are, and about the book you've written and why you've written it.
Okay. So, well, I'm Vanessa May. And who am I? Gosh, that's such a big question, isn't it? So I can now say that I'm a published author, which is kind of like a big thing to say. It's probably, an unusual thing for me to lead with. So I'm an executive coach. I also do life coaching. I'm a mum of two grown-up daughters now. One's just about to get her A-level results. The other's done uni. So I'm not an empty nester yet, but I'm in that stage of becoming something that I'm not yet sure what that's going to be. So,
yeah. I can so relate to that, because I've just become the empty nester at the end of March.
Congratulations.
Between us, we have 5 children. We had 2 living with us, so that's the last one that just left home. And then my husband's retired, so I'm like, ooh, this is a bit weird. So yeah. Somebody that was actually on the writing retreat was sort of talking about that she's reinventing her. She's retired.
Yeah.
And so she said she had this real sense of becoming an author was part of her reinventing who she is in the next phase of her life. So she's going to move from being the teacher, and so the actual therapist, to actually just being not just being, but being a teacher and an author and a writer, to share the wisdom rather than practice it, which was interesting in itself.
Yeah.
So tell us about your book and why you wrote this book in particular.
Well, I wanted to write a book for many years, probably going back about 20 years. And I actually wrote one and I got it edited, and then I did nothing with it. So I had this kind of pattern of wanting to write, feeling like I've got a million ideas in my head, starting to write, not doing anything with it. And then I work as an associate in leadership development, particularly women's development. And I happened to have a colleague that I'd done some training with, Jana, who you've also interviewed, who's an author. And there was this one moment where she said, she came in and she introduced her new book, and she's beautiful. She's really glamorous and very generous. And she introduced that she'd written this book, and I sat there and I felt this envy, maybe, is the honest truth. Like, oh gosh, this is something I've really wanted to do for so long. And I just went up to her and I just said, look, how did you do it? And she said, well, honestly, I got a mentor. And I went, but how did you do that? And she's like, well, I paid a lot of money and I invested in myself and I just upscaled. And it just, that conversation took me to a very uncomfortable place in me, which was, wow, I'm at a real edge anyway. I just restarted my business. Can I really afford to invest that much into a book that I don't know what the destination is for that journey of the book and for me? So, kind of the envy that I felt was almost guidance. Like, there's something in me that I really feel I want to get out and express. I don't know what that is. And if I don't make myself wrong for having that feeling, then maybe it's a universal flirt that says, hey, come on, Vanessa, time to really see whether you can actually express yourself in words. So, and in doing that, help other women. So it sounds like it's very me focused at the moment, but, the other part to it was, I'd never wanted to work with women. I'd gone to an all-girls school. and it was a very competitively academic school, of which I was kind of average towards the lower end, and constantly struggling, and never really finding I wasn't really sporty, I wasn't really artistic, never really finding me in that system. And I found that environment quite bitchy and very competitive. And so it kind of made me, almost prefer to work with men, if I'm honest, than women.
I can relate to that.
I had some fears that would come up with me. And then weirdly enough, just my life kept throwing me circumstances where I had to kind of confront that a little bit. And I got the opportunity to do some women's development. And it was like I fell in love. It was like, oh my goodness, so many mirrors of aspects of me, so much growth and development, and so much awareness of how the system shapes us, the culture shapes us, and then just really wanting, right, okay, I really want to, and it sounds really, I don't know, maybe I'm judging it, but I really want to lift our esteem so that those ceilings can kind of come off, and we can really identify with what we actually want, not what we think we should have, but what we actually want. So that was kind of really the two parts of it.
So you've had this conversation with somebody and they said, well, I've invested in a book mentor, and you're right on the edge.
Yeah.
So what happened between that conversation and getting started with this book that you've now published?
Well, so I had a conversation with Karen. I rang her up, found out how much it was, kind of went, and then we had a day where we sat down and just, she asked me, how did I work with people? And there's always a kind of formula, even though it isn't a formula. It's never a one size fits all, but there was a rhythm to the way in which I worked. And there was a pattern with some of the women that I worked with. And she said something really confronting to me up front, which is, don't make it a vanity book. So I had my own life story that was I was at a massive edge. I'd recently quit my job and then found that my relationship of, what was 33 years was no longer going to continue. And so I was at this, I decided I was going to separate, get divorced, start a new business, and just throw myself into everything. And I suppose, so I was at this massive edge of, I've got no idea what my future looks like now. And that was so uncomfortable. But also I was then at this edge of, I've now committed to Karen and this work. And so what she really helped me do was then say, right, okay, there was a part of me that wanted to just vomit out my story and just have the learning be my story. And she said, no, go out and do a survey and go to clients, people that know you, your network, and ask them questions about, rediscovering your authenticity, finding your leadership, and just what it's like to be a woman who works and lives and is a natural nurturer that wants to give to others first and really struggles to then find themselves in all of that at kind of probably midlife. So I did that survey, and I think then that helped me to see that it wasn't just me and my story. It wasn't that I wasn't doing life well enough. Actually, there are really common themes, and I could then start to separate out. So what are the things that are really shaping women, making us think we need to have it all and be perfect, but equally then just kind of, with hormones colliding and everything else all crashing in and losing a sense of your identity and all those things coming together, but not feeling like you're done yet. How do I write stories that help women see they're not alone and create connection, but also provide a process when you've kind of lost yourself to come home? And so that was really, it then started to create, it had a momentum of its own. So I took aspects of women that I'd worked with, and I put them into personas, and I then started, I downloaded just random images. I created like profiles, and what was the archetype that was running this person, and what were the issues. And so then I created like stories for the chapters, and then I found that there was a structure within the chapter that then said, okay, here's this person's story, here's what the key learning points were for this person, and here's how it fits into a process that I call Live Courageously. So it kind of found its own structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a really common thing, and it's often that's where Karen and I, Karen can, when she's writing books, she has a structure straight away, whereas I have to write the story and then reflect and see the structure or see the pattern in it. Yeah. And I think it's a really important part of the process, because I think people end up writing and feeling like they're getting nowhere, but they have to have the tools or the resources or the ability or even the help to actually look back through that story and see what are the patterns, what are the trends. Yeah. What is the process? Because as you say, even though you might not do it all in the same order with every single client, there will be key things that keep repeating, and you might do it in a different order, but they're part of a process, and what order you do may vary, but they're fundamental, aren't they? But often we can't find that as the author until we actually start the writing, and
that's the most painful bit, isn't it?
And it is, yeah. And I had that's when I say off air. That's where the second book, I had the title, I had the process, but there was something missing, and it was actually the outcome that they got.
Interesting.
It was that they get practical prompts for better conversations with the bit that came afterwards, and so I had to go through that process of actually writing. Yeah, and then keep having conversations with my clients and revisiting notes, and then eventually it was like, oh, it's prompts. That's what's happening. That's the thing that they get is those. And so I think you have to go through that as an author. And some people are more logically minded, and Karen can definitely do this. She's really great, and I admire her and envy her with equal measure. That when she's got an outcome clear in her mind, she can break the process down and she can just work her way through it. Whereas often I start working through a process and I don't really know where it's going.
Yeah,
So I can so relate to it. So we've mentioned it a little bit. Let's just get the title of the book up so people watching. The book is called then Live Courageously by Vanessa May. If you do want to get a copy, you can go here. And Vanessa's made it really super easy. So there's a UK one, a US one, and an Australian one to get onto Amazon to get your book ordered. I have just ordered mine. And as an aside, I have to say I love the cover. It's just like drew me in. I think I'd want it just on my shelf just because it's a lovely cover. It's one of those ones that's going to sort of draw me in. So well done with that. It's absolutely fantastic. So on an aside then, becoming an author for you then has been like what? We've kind of got an idea of how you went through it sort of, but if there were a metaphor to describe becoming an author for you,
that
would be like what?
I think it's like wing walking. Like those old-fashioned women that used to walk on the wings. It feels like that to me. It's a very naked process for me. Like I feel very naked, and it feels. I said to you earlier, it is a massive stretch for me to just say, "Hey, I'm an author," because there's a voice in my head that goes, "Are you? Who are you to? You're not."
It's a thing you have to try on though, don't you? And practice it and sort of say it out loud a few times.
Yeah.
So we've got this image now, a naked wing walker.
Well, yeah. I would say it feels naked, but I'm not naked in the wing walking, if that makes sense.
And I guess what I'm hearing, and I've heard the word vulnerable is because we discover parts of ourselves, I think, don't we, through the process. Yeah. And sometimes they're not very nice parts as well. And we have to work out how to edit that and update it. And, we learn about ourselves. And actually the whole editing process, I think we not only get rid of bits out of the book that aren't valid, for me anyway, that we get rid of parts of our own story that aren't serving us, because you think actually it's not worth putting in the book. And actually it's not even worth me carrying it around and telling it to myself or other people. And so it can be quite healing and cathartic, but also, as you say, it can feel like you're wing walking and naked, or just feel like you are, but you're not. I've got a really lovely image of that now, and I can totally see where you're coming from. So you said you've always wanted to write the book. Was there any other reason? Because the question is, why did you write this book?
Well, I wrote this book probably because I was struggling. And I don't feel that I was around a lot of vulnerable women that would, like, either they'd vomit the vulnerability, or they would completely mask up and armor up. And so I wrote the book, partly as a self-expression, but also as it would be really lovely for us to have more realness in our connection and our relationship and our conversations without this there's something wrong with you, like sometimes in particularly like the self-help and stuff like that, I feel like there's a lot of fix it, and we all go on our own journey with that, with coaching, like it is easy in the early days of coaching to have solutions in mind and ask people questions that take them to a certain point, and unconsciously take away someone else's resourcefulness. And I think there's something for me about I could have all this, I studied a lot in my life, and I've read a lot, and it didn't matter how many qualifications or studying I did, if I didn't apply that learning, it wasn't really very helpful. It's like my head, it was almost painful because I'd have an awareness, but then I'd still do the thing that I was doing. So in a way, the reason I say edge walker or wing walker is because there are, even now, okay, I've published the book, but the book won't do anything if I don't talk about the book, or if I don't connect with people around it. It won't do anything on its own. It'll sit on a shelf or on Amazon or wherever, and that brings me to an edge. So it constantly grows me, and I hope that it also equally grows other people, because courage isn't something you either have or don't. It's not linear like that. I think it's just sometimes we can let our fears really unconsciously overwhelm us, and that seems like it's reality. So there's almost like a calling forth of me in the book that I can't have integrity with myself and not keep kind of calling myself forward if I'm going to ask other people to, or invite them to do the same, and do it from a place of, you are already resourceful. It's just part of the conditioning that you have that has you think that you're not. So yeah, it's kind of like, yes, the book completes me, but I have to keep rereading the book and re-practice. Someone asked me a really great question I did a little book launch online, and someone said to me, what was the hardest part in my process for me? So I did this process, which was like, different A's and 5 A's. And I said, the first one is the hardest, which is anchor, really rooting in myself, turning out the noise, really, what is it that I'm feeling called to do, or I'm, compelled to do? What's really important for me here? It's hard. That is a really hard process for me, because I'm very other focused, like, oh, what do you want? What do you do? So the book, I have to keep rereading my own book and reworking my own book.
I can relate to that. I had to go through my own process several times. So the why then is that you had this calling to write it, but it's also it's calling you for growth. So even through the writing, then the publishing, and then actually keep telling people it's there, and then actually reading it yourself. The book itself is providing you with growth, which then also when that's obviously my words, not yours, but rippling out to other people, that's where the courage is coming from, because it's that
exactly
the expansion of it. So what has been the most important thing that you've learned through this process of sort of having that conversation with a friend about how did you get the book written, and now being here as a published author? What's been the most important lesson that you've learned?
I think fundamentally, that it's all made up. Everything's made up. That we dream up so much. We dream people up, we dream situations up, and that I mean, you'll really resonate with this because you talk a lot about the critic. I think deciding to claim a space for yourself, deciding to advocate for yourself, find your own agency. You can have a massive story around why you can't afford to, haven't got enough time, whatever. And actually it's all made, yes, that's always a reality, a reality if you choose to look at it that way. But I just think so much of things are made up. And, are we dreaming in a way that really supports us to become more of who we are? Or are we dreaming things up that actually keep us fear-based and limited? And who knows, right? We've had so much of that in the pandemic and lots of other things. Who knows around the corner?
What difference has that made, knowing that everything's made up?
It makes me braver because, and it makes me more accountable for myself, because what's the story that I'm telling myself here? So I don't like marketing very much. I don't like, I have a story around it, feels really icky, and sales feel a bit icky and inauthentic, and it's like, okay, so that's a story that I've made up. Part of the beauty of writing a book and actually getting people to, and doing an audit or, a survey, is you realize there are people that need some help with these things. They struggle with these issues. And actually, it's about service. It's not about doing something to someone that someone doesn't want. So that's just a really silly example, but I think equally in relationship, you can if things are difficult, and I see it with my girls, we can create dramas all over the place, and we can make ourselves a victim or whatever however we are in that. And I think just realizing, what are the assumptions I'm making? What are the stories that I'm telling myself? And is that really helping us move forward and be in right relationship together and have healthy conflict or not? So I feel like, it's just constantly me growing up.
And I guess I think what I'm hearing, and it might be me sort of making up stuff, so you can correct me if I have, but it sounds like that because you're they focused, you said, by writing a book that was focused on helping somebody else, and you'd had those interviews, those conversations, done the research, you then ended up almost with a guide that you can then use yourself, because it's come from you and you're going to trust it because obviously it's your stuff, but it's being guided by that they focus. And
that's really interesting. I've never thought about it that way, but it is exactly that. And it's that thing of, so every time because one of the nice things about a book like this is it's your assets. So you can break it down and give parts of it away, to people so that they can get to know you, decide to use someone that they benefit from working with, or being in relationship with. And what I found with just being able to break it down was that every time I recreated a little mini asset, I would run myself through that process, and so that then made me feel really confident and genuine, because it wasn't that I didn't have the results. I had the results from clients, but actually, am I doing this myself? Am I congruent? So it gives you that sense of congruency with yourself.
And I think that's another point to come back with people who take a bit longer with their books, because Karen and I obviously have this conversation about time, but Karen is an internal processor, so she'll think about it for a long time, whereas I talk about it for a long time. But there is also that part, and definitely for me, I won't publish the book until I've walked my talk. And then there is that awareness as you start writing about the process and you start helping other people, and you see them getting, you think, oh, actually, that does really work, but it'd be a blooming good job if I did it too, because actually I've held that space for others, but you haven't necessarily applied the same learning or the lessons for yourself. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is the lessons learned is that that other people are in the same situation, but taking your own advice is my terminology, not yours, but actually following your own process. So Is there anything you wish you'd known before you started?
Probably I wished I'd known who I was writing it for before I started. You know, I think if I'd have had a really clear outline, it would have made everything possible in a way that was smoother. But I mean, that could just be my perfectionist giving me a, you know.
Benefit of hindsight now, because it could be that you had to go through that process to work out who it was for, and there was no fast track. But with what you know now, what could you have done before to work out who it was for? Because I think that's quite important.
So I did the avatar, but what I didn't do was I didn't put labels around the avatar. So at the very end of writing it, and I didn't actually have a title for it to start with, that, you know, came probably midway through. But with the avatar, I didn't use words like empathic or intuitive or, you know, sensitive. And I think had I have known that I was writing for that, I would have probably positioned that more up front when I was doing it, and I would have, you know, maybe niched even more the writing. But I was looking more at age, life stage, career stage, you know, problem focused than necessarily identity focused. So it was quite, and that's the other thing though, that's what's weird is, so I've been working recently with quite a lot of young women who have come out of university and are, I don't know what to do. I can't find the career. Like, how do I do this? And actually the themes are all the same. You know, really helping someone listen to themselves, find what their values are, what's important. But when you're writing a book, you're writing for a particular, or I was writing for a particular age. So the stories therefore included things like perimenopause, or, you know, just the kind of things that would, disappointments in relationship, or, you know, those kind of situations that would fit that category. And I think maybe I'd have slowed down a little bit more and really thought, you know, separated me out from it and thought, who are these women, and niche them even further, probably.
Yeah. And I think you can get into that point sometimes with the book writing though, where you spend so much time trying to get it perfect, if you like. Yeah. And actually sometimes the first book is to us, for ourselves, maybe a younger version of ourselves, but it's where we were 10 years ago and we wish we'd known those sort of things. And the great thing is, Vanessa, there's can be book number 2, 3 or 4 for the other niches. So we could just do it all again. It's not a problem. So
because I have thought about book number 2, and I've definitely thought that there's a really specific topic around conflict that I'm really interested in. So it's like, that would be the difference between book number 1 and book number 2. Book number 2 would be much more lasered on what one specific. So I felt like almost book number 1 was like really broad, like here's how you work around all these things to re-establish your sense of self and clarity and etc., and be able to, when you want something, come up to your fear and really, really hold it and still keep moving forward towards what you want. Now I think I'd love to do something really niche in that. You know.
And I think the great thing is there's no right or wrong. Karen and I have we've gone back through all Karen's books, so she's redoing second edition of one of the 9. But if you look at her very first book, you can see that the second book is one chapter that's gone into a deep dive. The second chapter became a whole book in itself, and that's kind of happened throughout hers. And I've seen other people where they've written deep dive books, but then there's almost a summary book, like a little tiny, book that summarizes all of that, is sort of like a synopsis of all those books. There is no right or wrong with those, but it's having that awareness and then choosing consciously what you want your books to be about. So given all that, what's been your lowest point through the process of writing a book?
So I think the lowest point was I was ill. I was really ill in the January, and I didn't realize I was ill. I had severe anemia, and then I needed an emergency hysterectomy, and I had this deadline, these deadlines, all these, this is what I promised. Karen and I had said, we're going to do it in a year. I'm going to do it in a year, and I'm a real driver, and it's like, oh my goodness, you know, I did not expect this to happen. And I think that pressure felt really intense at the time. So I think I can have a habit of, and it's funny, I write about it in the book about really, I've got a lot of grit and I've got a lot of work ethic, and I'll drive and I'll push. And at one point, I think I was really pushing hard, and like actually it took some of the joy out of the writing process. And I'm kind of like, oh, you know, it's a bit like the editing process. It's like so painful. Like once it's done, it's done. I don't want to keep going back over and over and over and analyze it. It's like, oh, you know, like I'm not detailed. So and that's the other thing, is I forget what I've written. You know, it's like, how do you do that? But it's like, did I write? God, I forgot that. You know, and so I think there's this thing for me of holding yourself lovingly through that process, knowing that you're going to come up against your own walls and resistance. You know, it's a challenge, isn't it? So for me, maybe
I love that expression though, is loving yourself, holding yourself lovingly through the process. And I think that's it, isn't it? I know that Karen, you know, a lot of the fast track authors are people who want to be accountable, who want to do it in a short period of time, and therefore you have to be really super committed to do the homework, you know, do what you say you're going to do when you do it. And life gets in the way sometimes, you know, that's, you know, with best intentions, you know, stuff happens. And I do think that's what the book writing journey does, though, because you have that commitment to something and you have to find your way around that, just like you do other stuff in life, and still happen. And like you say, lovingly hold yourself, or even console yourself if it's not at the time you thought it was going to be. And I'm kind of talking to myself as I'm listening to, as I'm saying this to you. You do realize that. So be kind to yourself. It took you longer than you expected, but still stay committed to that outcome. So, well, if that's the lowest point, then is the, you know, being ill and not being able to keep your deadlines. What's been your biggest success to date?
So it was really interesting. So recently I was doing some associate work, and they had asked to use the courage audit. So in the book, I have a chapter about auditing your folk, like really simplifying, because I find the world really noisy, and particularly if you're quite sensitive, it's really easy to get, you know, kind of off with everyone else's mood, groove, whatever. So I wrote this whole kind of audit around you know, just different aspects of courage. So whether it was boundaries or authority, or, you know, just different aspects of courage. And I wrote, okay, so what are the beliefs that sit underneath that, and what are the behaviors? And the associate work that I did, they asked to use it in this development program for women. And so we were out in the States, and it was the first time where I'd actually seen people actually ticking the audit process. And it was the most so nerve-wracking for me. I was like really uncomfortable. And then seeing them, what a number of them said was, wow, that was really confronting. Like that really made me think, because so an example being, we were talking earlier about asking for help, real leadership behavior to ask for help. So many women I know go, yeah, I've got no problem asking for help. But actually, when it comes down to it, do you actually do that? Do you and so it was just really, it was such a high for me to see, one, that the questions made sense and that they worked, and that, but two, that it really made them reflect on a different level about where's my personal accountability in things, and where do I really need to focus if I want to have what I say I want and be braver.
So the high was actually seeing them fill out that audit.
Absolutely doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I could almost feel that feeling from here listening
to you. I felt sick. I was so nervous. I was like, oh, you know, what if they go, I don't get that question, or, you know, I mean, yeah. But it was just it's such a high to, and it was a high that someone else had read the book and said, I think that would really fit here. It's like, well, what a privilege for me, right? You know, it's like.
So as we wrap up today's interview, then, is there anything else you'd like people to know about the book writing journey or the book itself? I'll pop the details again up on while you're telling us about that.
Yeah, I would just say expect the unexpected. I would say that the book has grown me and it continues to grow me. And that is the beauty within it. It is nothing to do with how much you sell, whether you get on the top Amazon, whatever, all that kind of stuff. That's all very nice. But actually, I think where you go in the process shows you so much of yourself that you can then choose if you want to work with. So,
Yeah.
so it grows me, it continues to grow me, and that's a yummy feeling for, if we can lean into it, because it's like, I'm alive. Okay, I may not like this, like I'd much rather just like sit and just write it out and to go, yeah, it's done. But actually, if I'm really growing, then I know that I'm really alive and that I'm on the right track. So, yeah,
That's a beautiful place to finish, that you're really alive and you're growing. Thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll get you back in a year or so's time and find out what's happened with you and your book. So thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
So those of you that have been watching, obviously this show is sponsored by Librotas by Karen Williams. If you are a budding author and you are feeling stuck and you want that accountability and support that Vanessa talked about, then please do get in touch with myself or Karen, and we let you know about the support that we offer you, whether it's writing retreats or the fast track authors process. And I've got that name wrong, but we'll have a laugh about that later. So all the best, and we'll see you on the next episode, which I do believe is tomorrow at 11 o'clock.